Hello everyone, and welcome back to Daisy Styles. Now, a few months back, I created this video where I made Fuden, which was a fantasy horse inspired by the then current season autumn, as well as the culture of Japan. Making that horse was an absolute blast, and I really enjoyed all the new challenges it brought. So since it is currently winter in my country, I thought I would challenge myself and make another fantasy horse inspired by the season as well as another country's culture. After I'd spent a sufficient amount of time looking for ideas on Pinterest, I decided to sketch down my plans and ideas. At some point when I was looking for ideas, I came by this picture of a beautiful, big, crown-like thing, and I was very intrigued by it. With some further research, I learned that this is a traditional Russian headpiece called a kokoshnik. And since Russia is a country known for their harsh winters, I think it would be quite fitting to make a winter fantasy horse inspired by this Russian headpiece. I want the horse to look cold and icy, yet elegant, and for the colors, I want it to resemble snow glittering in the sun. I think a big draft horse will be fitting for the winter theme, so I'm using the Collecta Cream Draft Stallion. First thing I'm going to do is use a craft knife to shave down the seams on the horse. To me, visible seams kind of cheapen the look of the horse once painted, so I always do this step. Next, I want to remove the mane, and to make it a little bit easier on my hands, I'm going to dip the horse into hot water to soften the plastic. It's definitely not smooth like butter, but it's a lot easier this way. I'm also removing the ears as I kind of ruined them while cutting off the mane, and it will be easier just resculpting a new pair. Now I'm done with cutting off the bulk of the mane, but it's still a bit rough and needs to be smoothed down. I usually just do this by hand, however I recently got myself a brand new Dremel tool, which hopefully will make this process a little bit simpler. I attached a rough sanding bit onto the Dremel. Then after putting on my protective glasses, I start sanding down the rough edges. Now this was a very new thing for me, and it took a little bit of time to get comfortable with it, but I used it to smooth down all the jagged edges as well as the text on the belly. Now one thing I didn't really foresee is the amount of tiny plastic particles that will just stick to your entire body. Now this stuff was absolutely everywhere and I didn't really know how to remove it well, so I think I'll only be using the Dremel where it's strictly necessary in the future. Anyways, back to the horse. I'm going to use my trusty old craft knife to remove the tail, as I have some other plans for it. I feel so sorry for this horse, it looks like a weird rat now. Now my first experience with the Dremel wasn't very positive, and it also decided to break after like 2 uses, so I got my hands on a bigger and hopefully better one now. This time I attached a thin saw blade, and I'll be attempting to cut a slit on the top of her neck to make room for the plans I have for her mane. And it worked out better than I had feared. I was able to keep it pretty straight and it made a clean cut, so I'm happy with it. Now just like with Fuden, I chose a stallion mold for the base, however I want to change that. So I gave him a relaxing hot water bath to soften up the plastic, and then I just cut off the unwanted parts. I probably could have kept him a stallion, however, since she'll be wearing a kokoshnik, which is traditionally a woman's headpiece, I thought it would be most appropriate to change it. Alright, now we're done with all the cutting of this horse, and I also went ahead and added some wire armatures for her ears off camera. Now to fix the rough and missing areas, I'm of course getting out the epoxy sculpt. I thoroughly mix together equal parts from tub A and B, then start sculpting. And this time I tried my best to wear gloves because you really shouldn't be touching this stuff, but the gloves do make it hard, man. I stuck a piece of cardboard into the slit to prevent any epoxy from getting in there. And I used my hands and some other tools to form the clay on the horse. I like to look at my work several times in many different light settings to make sure everything's looking smooth and that I'm not missing any bumps that shouldn't be there. And to make the sculpted parts blend in even better with the horse, I add some fur texture with a thick needle while the epoxy is still soft. Right where I cut off the tail, I drilled in a hole off camera to accommodate for the new tail, and I stuck a needle in there to prevent any of the epoxy from getting in, but it looks really awkward. When I finished the first pass of sculpting, I let it cure overnight. But oh no, when I removed the cardboard, a bit of the neck came off. I'll just super glue that back on, and I'm sure no one will notice. Now that I'm done with the majority of the sculpting, I'm going to give her a quick spray of primer, which will highlight any bumps or imperfections that I need to correct. I used a fine grit sandpaper to gently smooth things out. And in hindsight, I should have been even more careful apparently, as I ended up sanding away some of the fur texture. So to try to restore it, I'm using this metal tool to firmly make some indents, just like I did with the needle when the epoxy was wet. Back to sculpting, only a couple things left now, and first thing is ears. I'm going to sculpt a small base with epoxy like this. Then I'm using a silicone tool to smoosh down a blob of epoxy into this kind of pointed leaf shape. I wrap that around the base, then while looking at a lot of reference pictures of horse ears, I refine the shape. I would usually cover the wire with a bit of sculpted on hair, however this time I'm doing it a little bit differently. The final thing I'll be sculpting are her mare parts. And the sculpting stage is complete. I'm actually pretty happy with how well the epoxy blends into the plastic. It's actually pretty tricky to do it this way. Alright, so in my sketchbook, I wrote down engraved details and in parentheses, Dremel. So, you know what that means. Or maybe you don't. Anyways, I'm going to sketch on the patterns I want onto the horse. Then we're busting out the Dremel again, this time with a tiny engraving bit. And yes, we're going to be engraving these swirly details into the horse. I start very carefully as I don't want to mess up, but I got the hang of it pretty quickly. I've never done anything like this, so I was really pleased that it was working out. I thought these patterns could kind of look like swirling snow, and they would also fill up a bit of the empty area on this horse. After another spray of primer, it's looking really good, so I'm going to try to replicate the exact same thing on the other side. I'm sure having swirly designs on a fantasy horse's body isn't an original idea. However, the inspiration from this actually came from Anna K Dolls on Instagram. She makes these wonderful BJD dolls, and I was especially impressed by the ones with engravings, so that really inspired me to do something similar on my horse. Alright, now I'm done with the engraving part, but as you can see, I've made these gouging holes on both of her cheeks. So I was trying to engrave a star, but I kind of failed, so I thought I would just make a small hole, then fill it in with epoxy, and engrave the star into the soft epoxy instead. And now that's done. So if you were paying close attention, you may have noticed that in my sketchbook, I not only mentioned engraved details, but also inset crystals, which basically means I want small diamonds sitting partly inside the horse. I decided to be thrifty with my source of diamonds, partly because I didn't have time to wait for shipping time. So I found this ring that I never use, and I think it's pretty cheap, so it's alright, and I'm picking out all those tiny diamonds. I also have these rhinestones, which are so pretty. I believe they may be Swarovski, so I really want to use those as well. So to make room for these diamonds on the horse, I'm going to use a manual drill with a drill bit that is the diameter of the diamond, and I drill in shallow holes where I want them to sit. So now that everything from cutting to sculpting to engraving to drilling is complete, it's time for paint. I wanted to mix a light blue, and for some reason I added some green, which in hindsight I don't think was a good idea, but oh well. I mixed up my colors, doing many tests along the way, and I end up with a muted blue tone. Again, in hindsight, I probably would have chosen an entirely different color, but alas, it's already done. I water out the paint significantly, then I start the tedious process of painting the horse layer by layer. And in between each layer, I set a clean box over top of the horse to prevent any dust from settling on the wet paint. After many layers of acrylic paint, everything's looking nice and uniform, and it's time to give it a spray of sealant in preparation for the pastel stage. I'm using my new favorite sealant, Mr. Superclear UV Cut Flat, and giving the horse 2 thorough sprays, waiting 30 minutes in between each layer. Now that she's sprayed and dry, it's time to give her some subtle shades of color using soft pastels. I want her to look freezing cold, so I'm giving her pink and purple shades on her extremities to make it look like she's gotten frostbite. Looking back, I think the concept I had of these colors were a lot better in my head than they turned out in real life. The pastel blue, pink, and purple are giving off major unicorn vibes, which is not really what I'm going for. I really tried to pull it back, as you will see, but I think if I were to redo this, I would have chosen more natural type of colors. When I can't build up the color anymore, I dust off the excess pastel, then give it another spray of Mr. Superclear. At this point, I realized that the unicorn vibes were a bit too strong, so I really tried to emphasize the frostbite look. I did a bit of work off camera, adding more reds, painting the eyes, and adding white highlights. And I also started to highlight the engraved parts with white paint. And on the subject of white paint, I realized the importance of adding white highlights. So I went to town adding highlights around the eyes, adding little freckles, and highlighting the wrinkles. One of the main inspirations for this horse was glittering snow, so she certainly needs some sparkles on her. I've also had this iridescent nail powder for a long time, and I thought it could look great on her eyes to give them kind of a frosted, almost blind look. After giving her the last accents of sparkles, I'm going to spray the horse with Mr. Superclear, totally out of frame. And after paints and pastels, she's looking like this, and I'd say I'm pretty happy with it. Before I add the diamonds, I add a bit of superglue into the hole, then I gently pick it up. Oh my gosh, I dropped it. So I had to spend a good 10 minutes just staring at the floor looking for this stupid stone. But luckily I did find it. I tried again and had more success this time, and it looks really cool. Just like I did in my last video, I want to add UV resin to the eyes to make them look glossy and 3D. To cure the resin and make it hard, I'm putting it under a UV light for about 1 minute. Another thing I want my snowy horse to have is a flowy mane. So again, using Mosekito's yarn weft tutorial, I'm creating these wonderful soft bundles of hair. When the wefts are done, I'm inserting them into the opening on her neck. I also add her forelock as well as feathers on her hooves. Now that all the hair is added, it needs a bit of styling. So I'm going to heat up a metal knitting needle using a straightening iron. Then I use the hot metal to curl and style the mane. Now that her flowy mane is done, it's time to make her most eye-catching accessory, her kokoshnik. I made this pattern out of paper and was initially very excited about making the kokoshnik, but my enthusiasm quickly dwindled. After meticulously making a wire base and sewing a very friable fabric around it, I was just going to iron it flat and it totally melted. With a severe lack of motivation and inspiration, I mustered up the will to make another one, and it did go a lot better this time. I did have fun decorating it though. Kokoshniks are usually adorned with lots of pearls in intricate patterns, so I'm trying to mimic something similar on mine, all within the color scheme. With a few more embellishments, along with a glittering veil, this snowy horse is complete. I decided to name her Lavina, which in Russian means avalanche. Now, I'm kind of torn over this project, to be honest. On one hand, I really like her glittering kokoshnik and her design, but on the other hand, I feel like I could have done better, and I can kind of see where I gave up along the way. I don't know, I guess it just really didn't hit the spot for me, and pastel color palettes are probably not my favorite either. But for what she is, I do think she looks nice. I really like the frostbitten look, and also her white lashes I think look very cool. Let me know what you guys think of her, and if you like these types of fantasy horses, then you're in luck, as I am planning to make 2 more, one inspired by spring and one by summer, along with having a country as an inspiration, just like I did with Lavina and Fuden. If you have any suggestions for what countries I should use as inspiration, then feel free to comment down below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!